happen. The Saudis would not cooperate.
Jonathan, thank you. Now, the political chief of a failing police force has announced he will not stand for re-election next year. Gareth Coppinger, the Cleveland Police and Crime Commissioner, faced calls to resign after his force was the first ever to be rated inadequate in a damning report last week. Mr. Coppinger told this programme on Friday he would stand for re-election, but today he said he changed his mind. Inspectors said Cleveland police failed to investigate crime properly or identify vulnerable people. Now, within the last few minutes, it's been announced that the BBC's Director General Tony Hall has reversed a complaint against breakfast presenter Naga Manchetti. Hundreds and dozens of actors and broadcasters, including our own Christian Guru Murthy, asked the BBC to reverse its decision criticising Ms. Manchetti after she said on air that some of Donald Trump's tweeted comments about US congresswomen were embedded in racism. Tony Hall has now said that he doesn't think her words were sufficient to merit upholding the complaint. Christian.
Well, welcome back to Manchester. Let's just get some quick reaction to that breaking news about the BBC and the Naga Manchetti ruling, because we happen to have with us for our next discussion Craig Oliver, who was a senior manager at BBC News before becoming David Cameron's Director of Communications. How do you think this happened, and in the BBC phrase, should deputy heads roll?
Look, I think that the first thing to say is that there was absolutely nothing wrong with what Naga said, but the real concern of the BBC is, yet again, here's an example of something that should have been flagged at a very high level, that should have been dealt with at a very high level, arguably the Director General's office, and wasn't. I think there'll be deep concern that people misinterpreted the guidelines in this way, and it got to the stage of announcing something like this and causing the concern and upset that it did.
Do you think it shows institutional racism, or at least a lack of diversity?
I think it's more likely that people are reading the guidelines and thinking that they're interpreting the letter of them and they're being very clear on them and that they're defending the BBC as an impartial institution. In fact, what's happened is they've made a very big mistake here, and they should have been aware that this is a deeply sensitive issue. It should have been raised further up the food chain, and people should frankly have recognised this a lot earlier than they did. And I think it'll be another inquiry in the BBC, and why did it get to the stage of getting out there and going this far before very senior people got involved?
Thank you very much for now. Well, much of the conversation here in the cafes and bars has been about the claim by a female journalist, Charlotte Edwards, that Boris Johnson groped her thigh 20 years ago at a lunch, a claim denied by Boris Johnson. This followed a separate investigation into allegations that Mr. Johnson didn't declare his friendship with businesswoman Jennifer Arcuri, who was given public grants and access to trade missions while he was London mayor. Cabinet members were today defending him, but how might these issues play with voters? Our political correspondent Liz Bates has been asking people here what they think.
An uncomfortable-looking Boris Johnson, following days of uncomfortable questions. While his party would prefer to talk about policy here in Manchester, it's his character that is dominating this Conservative conference. Charlotte Edwards claims that the Prime Minister squeezed her thigh at a dinner party 20 years ago. Downing Street strongly deny the allegations, but Edwards is adamant, saying, if the Prime Minister doesn't recollect the incident, then clearly I have a better memory than he does. Some senior Tories have said they believe her, including Health Secretary Matt Hancock on this programme last night.
I know Charlotte well, and I entirely trust what she has to say.
You believe her when she says he grabbed her up the thigh?
Well, I know her, and I know her to be trustworthy.
But here, ministers are tight-lipped.
Do you believe Charlotte Edwards, Nicky? So the Prime Minister has Downing Street made very clear that they don't, the allegation's not true, and
And you believe the Prime Minister over Charlotte Edwards? Do you think she's lying?
Oh dear, yeah.
Are you saying that she's lying?
Thank you. I'd say that I don't really comment.
Okay. Jacob, do you believe Charlotte Edwards?
You've got to make arrangements properly for interviews. This doorstepping at the party
It's a
conference
party
is not the
conference.
right
We're just
way
going to find out what you think
doing
about what's on the
Go
list.
through the right path. All your questions are.
Others seem irritated that this is even up for discussion. Ian, can I just ask you what you think of Charlotte Edwards?
Hang on a second, wait a second.
Ian, do you believe Charlotte Edwards?
It's not my job to believe or disbelieve it. It's a matter the Prime Minister has said is simply beyond any comment on my part.
So, do you believe the Prime Minister, though? I mean, you're serving him.
No, I would believe the Prime Minister if he makes a statement about it. And
So Charlotte is lying?
Just hold on a second. In our system, you are innocent until proven guilty, okay? That's all I say. So he has said, not true, I go with that.
They have different memories, so I don't know. I wasn't there.
Okay, so do you believe the Prime Minister then?
And Tory members here seem to be staying loyal to their leader.
That was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It was in the 90s, and people, you know, who knows, maybe they were drunk. It was at a dinner party.
No, I don't think Boris Johnson has a problem with women. I think it's pretty irresponsible to be making statements about someone with unfounded allegations made against him.
Just get rid of it all. We've got far more important things to worry about than his private life.
But while there is plenty of support from the Tory faithful, could this damage the Prime Minister in the polls?
In the time that Boris Johnson has been leader, he has seen his personal ratings fall back a bit and fall greater among women voters. But in both cases, whether it's men or women, his personal ratings are still, firstly, very high for any politician, and secondly, significantly higher than those of, for instance, Jeremy Corbyn.
Personal or political, this Prime Minister is never far from controversy. But can he move beyond these latest claims, or will he continue to be followed by his past?
Well, joining me now, the Conservative MP Gillian Keegan, Rachel Sylvester, the political columnist at The Times, and Sir Craig Oliver is still with us. Rachel Sylvester, is Boris Johnson fit to be Prime Minister?
I don't think it's up to me to say. The Tory members have chosen him, and the voters at some point will declare whether or not they think he is. But certainly he's shown errors of judgment, he's shown questions about his character, and these latest allegations just raise all those questions again.
Who do you believe?
I don't think Charlotte Edwards is lying. I don't see why she should have any motive to lie at all. I believe her, like Matt Hancock said last night.
So that means when he point blank denied it today, he's lied again in your view?
I don't want to accuse him of that, but it...
Well, why not? I mean, he's been shown to have lied before. I mean,
look, I think these things matter. It's an allegation of sexual harassment. That's, you know, he was in a position of authority at that point over her. And also, I think I spoke to one senior Tory woman here today who said this stuff's priced in for Boris Johnson, but there's a point at which the price gets too high. And I think there's a danger for him that he thinks it's all a distraction, but actually there comes a point when people, especially female voters, start to think, is this the sort of person we want to have leading our country?
Gillian Keegan, do you believe Boris Johnson when he denies this allegation?
I've no reason not to believe him. I mean, he's in a very prominent position. I'm not going to be any proof
You
of
do
this.
have a reason not to believe him.
I don't know, Charlotte.
Record.
Now, that's definitely not how I see it. I don't look at somebody's past record and think every time they go to dinner they're going to put their hands on someone's thigh. No, that's not how I think. So there's no past, present, future about this allegation, apart from the fact it's 20 years old. It's impossible to know. It's impossible to know. I find it odd that it's come out, although we were just talking, apparently it's, you know, Charlotte's just started working in a new job, and this is her first column. I have no idea. I can't think of why I would bring up something that happened 20 years ago. And things did happen 20 years ago in the corporate world all the time. I worked all over the world. Lots and lots of things happened. Perhaps I should write a book. But the reality is, I can't think why I would now bring that up. So I think I've no reason not to believe him. It's going to be he said, she said. There'll be no evidence at all. You know, and you're innocent till proven guilty.
If you were still, you know, if you were advising Boris Johnson, I mean, is it imaginable for you to be in that situation that the Prime Minister is accused of these sorts of things?
Look, the first thing I would be saying is, look, try and shut this down. Do not add any fuel to the fire. And it may sound cynical, but any comms professional looking at this thinks that an on-the-record denial is a real problem, because you put yourself in a situation where journalists report the Prime Minister denies groping a woman, then you're also in a situation where you're almost taunting other people to come forward. So it's not a great idea, even if you want to defend yourself, to add fuel to this particular story. And I think it's a problem. It's kept it going for longer than it perhaps would have done, and it may continue over the coming days.
And the other one is potentially bigger, with Jennifer Arcuri.
Well, it depends how you measure it. Obviously, if somebody's going around being a sex pest, that's a very serious issue. The other thing is, obviously, if he is shown to have been in a situation where he's effectively allowed public money to go to somebody it shouldn't, that is obviously a very serious situation. The question is there a paper trail? Is there a way of proving it? So far, nobody's come out with a killer blow.
The other thing that's sort of emerged today is in an interview with one of the regional ITV